throughout our days, as we go through our lives, we have all sorts of voices in our heads. Thoughts, narratives, stories. Many of these stories play over and over. They are themes. They are stories that have played themselves out for us over and over. When new situations arise, we interpret them through the lens of our familiar stories. If you take some time to pay attention to the words in your head, you might notice certain words, certain phrases that come up over and over and over again. You'll probably notice certain familiar emotions, feelings, sensations. You might even find memories that are attached to these words. Familiar words and stories, travelling down well-worn paths in your mind. Familiar words and stories that gave you a context, that gave you a familiar way to understand new things that happen as you move through your days. Sometimes these stories are useful, supportive, truthful stories. Sometimes these are stories about strength and resiliency. Stories about love and care for ourselves and others. Sometimes these are stories that don't always help us. Our stories can be like traps, things that restrict us, that we keep falling back into again and again. They don't help us. They keep us from seeing the world as it actually is, with all of its potential. Our familiar stories can keep us from changing and adapting. They can keep us from seeing newer, potentially more honest, potentially more helpful ways of seeing things, ways of understanding things, ways of approaching ourselves and the world. If you have stories that aren't serving you well, it's not your fault. It's okay that those are the narratives you have. You have the stories you have for good reasons. Often, we develop stories when we are quite young. We learn stories from the people around us. We learn stories that help us survive in the environments we find ourselves in. We learn the stories people around us encourage us to learn. Stories that keep us from reaching out to other people, that keep us from taking risks, that keep us from asking for love or respect. can help keep us safe from getting hurt in environments that feel unsafe. Stories that say, people aren't safe, I can't trust people, can help us if we grow up surrounded by unsafe people. Stories that say, I always fail, I shouldn't even try, can help us if we grow up in environments where it isn't safe for us to fail. These stories don't always help us as adults. As we go through our lives, we grow, we change. We find ourselves in new situations, new environments. If we pay attention to the world around us, and if we pay attention to our stories, we might notice that our stories can become like cages. They aren't keeping us safe anymore. They're keeping us trapped in a world that doesn't have to exist anymore. Some types of stories that might not be serving us are stories that blame ourselves when things don't happen how we want. It's my fault, or I always mess things up, or I'm not good enough. Some are stories that always focus on the negative and ignore positives, like nothing ever goes my way. Some are stories that say things in black and white, saying things as either all good or all bad. Not seeing how things are so often shades of grey. Some are stories of always expecting the worst. I shouldn't even try, or he must hate me, or I'll probably fail. The good news is we can always change our stories. We can always take small steps to start paying attention. To start paying attention to the narratives in our head. To start listening to your stories. And then to start asking, does this story serve me? Is it true? Does it help me? What would it be like if I believed a different story? If I started trying to see the world through a different lens, with different stories. So, that is the first step. To listen. Notice. Whenever a voice in your head says something that feels unpleasant, something scared, something that doesn't feel good, whenever you feel an unpleasant feeling, notice the words that might attach to it. You can notice your storytelling response to those feelings. Pay attention to your narratives. You could maybe write the words down when you notice them. This can help you capture patterns, help you notice stories that repeat for you over and over. This can also help you look back at your stories outside of the heat of the moment, in a time and place when you can reflect. What is the message? It may be, I'm not good enough. Maybe, no one likes me. Maybe, it's all my fault. Maybe, I should have done something to make this not happen. The first step is noticing you are telling a story and noting or even writing down what that story is. The second step is to set aside your story. Set aside your narrative. And just pay attention to the specific situation where this story came up. Just pay attention to the feelings you were feeling. No judgments, no analysis, no stories. Just feeling your feelings in that situation. You most likely were experiencing unpleasant emotions. Maybe you were hurt, angry, sad, scared, frustrated, or anxious. Reflect on that situation. Feel those feelings. Be with them. You can name the emotions you were feeling. Breathe. Relax. If this is a particularly charged or upsetting situation, you can take as much time and space as you need to look at and feel the feelings, to remember the situation. Let yourself feel whatever you were feeling about that situation. What was it like to be you in that time and place? What is it like to be you now when you think about that situation? Experience. Feel. The third step is to return to your story, to your narrative, to the words, the lens you made to respond to the situation and to your emotions. Are your words true? If they aren't true, what would true words be? If they are true, is there another story that would also be true or even truer? Is there a more honest, more complex story you could believe instead? A story that is truer to your experience today. A story that is truer to the emotions you are feeling. What is a different story you could believe? For example, if your story was, "No one likes me," other stories could be, "I like other people," or "I like myself." If your story is, "I'm always so nervous," a new story could be, "I'm so brave." Looking at your story with honesty and creativity, exploring other possible stories. The first step is to remind yourself of your new story. To notice when you use your old story. To go through each of these steps again, and then to remind yourself of your new story. You can even make a better new story if you find one that suits you better. You will notice your old stories will still come up. The grooves of habit in our mind can be so deep, especially old habits, habits we have cultivated for many, many years. Remembering that our stories are not absolute reality. Our stories exist in our minds, and we can always change our minds. You can always change your mind. You can always choose to live in a different story. The stories we tell shape our reality. They're the lenses, the concepts, the feelings and sensations through which we experience the world. They're like the channels the river of our lives flows through. The momentum of our habits of interpretation and thought building our reality for us, directing how you respond to situations in your life, creating further momentum, taking you to new places, all along the grooves worn through your stories. With attention, you can divert your river. With nudges, refocusing, reframing by slowing down and listening to the stories you are telling yourself, to the lenses you are looking through, stopping and asking yourself, is this true? Is this helpful? Are there other stories that could be more true, more helpful, more supportive, more loving? Stories that would better direct me toward being the person I want to be, toward building the life I want to have. Stories that are more complex, more honest, more flexible and responsive to the complexity and constant change of the world around us. So, when you notice an unpleasant experience, you can stop. You can look and notice your story. Notice the words you are telling yourself. You can even write them down. Then you can set aside the story and just feel. Experience your emotions. Experience, feel, be in the situation that led to you telling your story. Then, after you have allowed yourself to rest in the experience of the raw, unjudged situation, look back at your story. Is it true? Is there a better story that could be truer? That could suit you better? Is there a story that could make your life better, more complex, more honest, more loving, more grateful? Building new groves, redirecting the river and momentum of your life, recentering on the things you care about, recreating your experience of the world, starting with paying attention to your stories.